March of last winter, I was locking up my cabin on the edge of Duluth when I heard something no soul should ever hear in a storm like that. A child crying through a whiteout you couldn't see 5 feet through. When the wind shifted, I spotted her, a thin little girl barely 10, dragging a smaller boy through snow that swallowed their legs. She fell once, then twice, then a third time, but she kept pulling that boy against her chest like she was shielding the last warm thing she had left. By the time Ranger led me to them, her lips were blue, and the boy could hardly breathe. And when I picked him up, that girl looked at me with those tired brown eyes and whispered a line no child should ever have to say, "Please, save my brother first." Right then I knew two things. Whatever they ran from was worse than any blizzard, and before sunrise, I'd either get them safe, or we'd all be swallowed by that storm together. Children beneath the winter storm, snow drifted across Duluth in a relentless white curtain, swallowing streets and sound alike. Lily Parker, 10 years old and thin as a winter reed, moved through the swirling frost with a trembling persistence far too old for her small frame. Her long brown hair, usually tied with a fraying blue ribbon, clung damp to her pale cheeks. Bruises in shades of violet and yellow bloomed along her arms, and her left shoulder throbbed where a grown man's hand had pressed too hard. She wore a thin pink sweater meant for autumn, not a Minnesota winter, and her jeans, torn at one knee, had frozen stiff around her legs. Behind her stumbled Jacob, only 6, wrapped in an oversized gray hoodie that dragged along the ground like a ghost of warmer days. His round face, usually soft with childish innocence, was gaunt and red from cold. His breath came in sharp, wheezing clouds, each one weaker than the last. When he coughed, it rattled in his chest in a way that scared Lily more than any shout from their uncle. She squeezed his hand tighter, though her fingers were numb and fading fast. They had run from the apartment just 20 minutes earlier, though time felt longer inside a storm like this. Their uncle, Mark Harris, had been drinking again. Mark was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s, with thinning blonde hair and a permanent sourness settled across his unshaven jaw. Years of bitterness clung to him like smoke. Bitterness from a failed construction job, a divorce, and a lifetime of blaming everyone but himself. When the bottle of cheap beer slipped from Lily's icy hands, Mark's temper shattered with it. He had hit her with the back of his hand, once, twice, until Jacob cried so loudly that Mark turned on the boy instead. That was when Lily ran. She grabbed Jacob's wrist and pulled, dragging him out the door before Mark could steady himself on the table. She didn't stop to grab coats or shoes. She didn't dare. Now the storm punished them for escaping. Snow buried the sidewalk in uneven ridges, forcing Lily to lift her legs higher than her exhausted muscles wanted. She leaned forward as the wind screamed in her ears, pushing needles of ice against her bare skin. The orange glow of a distant street lamp flickered like a weak promise of safety. She fixed her eyes once, refusing to let the darkness swallow her hope. Jacob tugged at her hand. "Lily, I'm tired." "I know," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Just a little more. We have to keep moving." Her words were brave, but her legs wobbled. Hunger clawed at her stomach. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's school lunch, a half sandwich she'd secretly saved so Jacob could have more. A passing car slowed as it approached them, its headlights cutting through the storm. Lily lifted her head, ready to wave for help, but the car hesitated only a second before speeding off, its taillights disappearing in the white void. She tried not to let it break her spirit, but Jacob's soft sob filled the silence it left behind. Another block, another step, another breath of icy air that burned her lungs. Eventually her strength cracked. Lily's knees buckled, sending her crashing onto the snow-packed pavement. Jacob fell beside her, shivering violently. She tried to push herself up, but her arms felt far away, like they belonged to someone else. The cold pressed against her back, soaking through the thin fabric, stealing whatever warmth she had left. Jacob pressed his face into her shoulder. "Lily, I'm scared." Her throat tightened. "It's okay," she said, even though nothing was. "I'm here." She wrapped both arms around him. They curled together like two small birds trying to survive a storm meant for bigger creatures. Snow gathered on their hair, their eyelashes, the thin fabric of their sweaters. The world dimmed around them, shrinking to the sound of the wind and Jacob's weakening breath. She wanted to move, to stand, to find help, but her body refused. The cold was heavy now, almost gentle, coaxing her eyes closed. Somewhere between waking and fading, she whispered an apology to Jacob, a soft little plea carried away by the wind. "I'm sorry. I tried." And then, a sound, faint but sharp through the storm. A dog's bark, not a panicked one, not wild. A single short bark, focused, alert, like a signal from something that had found them. Lily forced her eyes open. Through the blur of snow and darkness, she saw a shape moving, large, steady, accompanied by the rhythmic crunch of boots on frozen ground. She thought she saw the outline of a dog, broad chest, pointed ears, fur bristling against the wind. But her vision wavered, fading in and out. Was someone coming, or was her mind making stories to ease the fear? The wind roared, the snow thickened, the shadow moved closer but not fast enough. Her eyelids dropped again. Jacob's breathing slowed against her chest. The last thing Lily heard before slipping fully into the cold was another soft bark. Closer this time, almost beside her. A deep voice followed, low, steady, but distant like a memory. Then nothing but the storm. The Navy SEAL on the frozen outskirts snow whispered against the cabin windows, a softer voice than the storm outside, but still cold enough to settle in the bones. Ethan Walker moved with a controlled urgency through the dimly lit living room, his limp more pronounced after the long trek through the blizzard. At 42, Ethan carried the weather of his life in the lines across his face. A faint scar crossed his right cheek, a pale mark earned during a rescue operation overseas, the kind that left deeper wounds inside a man than the ones visible on his skin. His beard, short and dark with flecks of gray, framed a jaw hardened by years of discipline and loss. Beside him stayed Ranger, his 5-year-old German Shepherd partner, moving with an alert grace. The dog's coat, black saddle fading into brown along the legs, gleamed even in the cabin's low light. His eyes, intelligent and steady, tracked every sound, his tail held low but poised. Ranger was trained to read Ethan's moods, and tonight the dog stayed close, sensing danger even in the warmth of the house. Ethan set Jacob gently onto a thick wool blanket next to the wood stove. The boy's eyelids fluttered, his breathing shallow. The hoodie he wore clung to his small body like a frozen shell. Lily hovered beside him, curled inward, arms wrapped around herself. Her hair dripped melted snow onto the cabin floor, each drop a quiet reminder of how close they had come to collapsing in the street. "Easy," Ethan murmured, his voice low and steady, the same voice he had used to calm wounded soldiers. "You're safe now." Jacob stirred but didn't speak. Lily watched Ethan's hands, noticing how careful they were despite his size. He retrieved a metal kettle from the stove and poured warm water into a small cup. When he held it toward Jacob, Lily reached out instinctively, checking the temperature first before giving it to her brother. Ethan nodded, impressed by her caution learned the hard way. As the children sipped water in small, trembling mouthfuls, Ethan examined the marks on Lily's arms. Straight lines, some fading into older yellow bruises, some newer, harsh and blue. His expression barely changed, but something sharp moved behind his eyes. Ranger let out a low rumble in his throat, recognizing the shift in Ethan's posture. "You kids get hurt like this often?" Ethan asked quietly. Lily hesitated. Her shoulders twitched, shrinking inward like she expected to be struck for answering wrong. She stared at the stove instead of at Ethan. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and hoarse. "Uncle Mark, he gets mad. A lot." Jacob's cough broke the moment. The sound was wet, rattling. Ethan leaned in, placing 2 fingers on the boy's wrist. His pulse was weak, his skin cold and clammy. Ranger moved closer, lying down so Jacob could lean against the dog's warm flank. "Feels like pneumonia," Ethan muttered. "We'll keep him warm. Slowly, no sudden heat. You did the right thing getting him out of there." Lily's eyes filled with tears, not from the cold this time. "I didn't know where else to go." Ethan rose and crossed the room toward an old wooden cabinet. Inside were his emergency supplies. Bandages, blankets, a kit from his years of service. He grabbed what he needed and returned, beginning to clean the cuts on Lily's hands. As he worked, he spoke gently. "My name's Ethan. Ethan Walker. That's Ranger. He's well trained, but he's got a soft heart under all that fur. What are your names?" "Lily," she whispered, "and Jacob." Ethan nodded once, as if filing the information like a soldier memorizing coordinates. "All right, Lily. We're going to take care of Jacob first. Then we'll figure out what to do next." For the first time, Lily's shoulders eased just a little, but safety, like most good things, didn't last long. A sudden pounding rattled the front door. Ranger shot to his feet, teeth bared, hackles raised. Lily flinched so hard she almost dropped the blanket covering her legs. Ethan stood, his limp more obvious as he moved toward the door. He kept his voice calm. "Stay with Ranger." The pounding came again, louder. "Police!" a man's voice shouted through the storm wind. "Open up!" Ethan frowned, confused. He hadn't called yet. He unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see two figures, a young police officer and a woman in a thick red coat holding a clipboard. The officer introduced himself first. "Officer Daniel Brooks," he said, his cheeks flushed red from the cold. He was tall and thin, with sandy hair and a nervous way of shifting his weight from one foot to the other, as if unsure of his authority. His partner, Ms. Karen Doyle, stepped forward. She was a social worker in her early 50s, with a round face, dark curls pinned behind her ears, and tired eyes that suggested she had seen too many broken homes and not enough justice. Ms. Doyle lifted her clipboard. "We received a report of 2 missing minors from the residence of Mark Harris. He claims they were abducted by an unstable ex-military man. That would be you, Mr. Walker." Ethan stiffened. "Abducted? You're standing in a cabin with 2 half-frozen kids who nearly died in the street." "Still," Officer Brooks said, glancing past Ethan toward the children, "we need to confirm their safety." Ranger growled, stepping between the strangers and the children. Lily pressed a hand into Ranger's back, trembling again. Ms. Doyle narrowed her eyes, taking in Ethan's height, his beard, his heavy boots, the scar on his cheek, details easily twisted by someone who wanted him to look dangerous. "Sir, we need you to come with us to clarify a few things." Ethan looked once at Lily and Jacob, then back at the officer. His jaw tightened. "All right," he said quietly. Officer Brooks stepped forward, relieved. "Thank you, sir." The door closed behind Ethan with a thud that felt far too final. Ranger stayed planted in front of Lily and Jacob, unblinking, the quiet rumble in his chest promising he wouldn't move until Ethan returned. The second night of snow and siege, wind clawed at the cabin eaves, dragging long cries through the dark, as a new blizzard swept over the outskirts of Duluth. Ethan Walker had barely returned from the police station when the storm began to tighten around his cabin like a closing fist. The officer who interviewed him, Sergeant Harold Gaines, a man in his late 50s with a stooped posture and a trimmed gray mustache, had listened with unusual patience. Gaines's voice always carried a gravelly tremor, the kind that came from decades of shouting orders on military bases and in police academies. A retired Army infantryman, he recognized the hard edge of truth when he heard it, and that recognition stirred doubt toward Mark Harris's claims. Still, procedure was procedure, and the law moved slower than danger. Lily and Jacob now rested on the couch, bundled in blankets that swallowed their small frames. The wood stove emitted a steady glow, filling the cabin with heat that battled the cold seeping through every crack. Ranger sat beside the siblings, his body curved protectively around them, ears flicking at every creak in the walls. Ethan stood near the window, lifting the curtain with 2 fingers. Snow drifted thick against the glass, reflecting the cabin's lamplight. He scanned the yard, the fence line, the narrow gravel road leading to the main street. Something gnawed at the back of his mind, a tension he had learned not to ignore. The front screen door rattled, then a soft metallic click. Ethan's body went still. Ranger lifted his head, a low growl vibrating in his chest. "Ethan?" Lily whispered, sitting up slightly. Her voice was thin, frightened, as if carrying the weight of 100 bad nights. He turned quickly. "Downstairs. Both of you. Now." The tone, firm, level, unshakable, sent Lily's heart racing. She scooped Jacob into her arms, holding him as though he might vanish if she let go. Ranger followed Ethan toward the stairs, his claws tapping softly against the wooden floor. In the basement, Ethan flicked him on a dim lantern hanging from a nail. The small room held an old workbench, a metal shelf with tools, and crates of emergency supplies. He knelt in front of Lily and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Stay here. Keep the lantern low. Ranger will be close." Jacob buried his face in Lily's sweater. Ranger brushed his head under the boy's trembling hands in reassurance. When Ethan climbed the stairs again, he moved differently, more precise, each step measured. He shut off the living room lights and let the house settle into shadow. His breath slowed, his pulse steadied. The part of him shaped in deserts, jungles, and combat zones sharpened, sliding over his nerves like cold steel. Outside, someone whispered, boots crunched over snow. A second voice muttered something too faint to catch. Then the first rock hit the window, hard enough to startle but not break it. A taunt. Another followed, louder this time. Ethan peered through the corner window. Two trucks sat half hidden near the tree line, rusted, old, the kind driven by men who didn't fear cold or conscience. Shapes moved between them. 3 men, maybe 4. One had a bulky jacket and a hood pulled low, but his stance gave him away. Mark Harris. Even in the storm, his hunched swagger carried the same sloppy hostility that fueled his fists. Mark lifted a megaphone, though his breath steamed wildly, barely contained rage spilling into the air. "Bring them out, Walker!" he shouted, voice cracking with cold and fury. "They're my responsibility!" Ethan didn't bother answering. He set his jaw and quietly slid the bolt across the cabin door. Mark slammed something against the railing, a long object that clattered like a metal pipe. His companions spread out, emboldened by his drunken determination. One of them carried a canvas bag that sloshed suspiciously. Another flicked a lighter open and shut, testing it against the wind. Ethan clenched his teeth. Gasoline, fire. They were amateurs, desperate but unpredictable. He grabbed a flashlight from the wall hook, aiming it upward. When one of the men approached the porch, Ethan flicked the beam into the intruder's eyes. The man cursed, stumbling back, covering his face. Ranger reacted instantly. Slipping out the back door, an exit Ethan had left unlatched for the dog, the German Shepherd bounded into the storm, slicing through the snow like a streak of earth-toned lightning. He circled around the side of the house and appeared beside the intruders, barking sharply, startling them into retreat. The man with the lighter panicked first. He dropped the flame, spilling gasoline onto his own boots. Ranger lunged, clamping his teeth around the man's sleeve and pulling him down. Ethan emerged from the front door, cold biting into his face, and swiftly restrained the man with a zip tie pulled from his coat pocket. "Back off," Ethan warned the others, but the remaining intruders were already breaking Mark's courage apart. The sight of Ranger, the sudden discipline in Ethan's stance, and the bright shock of the flashlight made them falter. Still, one remained stubborn enough to throw a rock that shattered a side window. The wind screamed through the gap. Lily, down in the basement, flinched at the sound. Jacob clung tighter, listening to the chaos above. The pounding, the shouting, the sound of Ranger's bark slicing through the storm. Just when the tension peaked, blue and red lights flickered across the snowy yard. A police cruiser braked hard, tires skidding slightly on ice. Sergeant Gaines stepped out, his heavy winter coat dusted with frost. 2 younger officers followed, one a lean woman with short auburn hair named Officer Sarah Delgado, sharp-eyed and brisk in her movements, the other a stockier man named Officer Ben Ruiz, with a rounded jaw and calm voice. "Enough, Sergeant Sarl," Gaines barked, his command echoing with authority born from age and war. Mark spun around. "They kidnapped those kids. He stole them from me." Gaines didn't even flinch. "That's funny," he said, lifting a hand toward the cabin's security camera, "because this whole mess is recorded." One by one, the thugs froze. Mark's confidence collapsed. His knees buckled as the officers cuffed him, his breath stinking of alcohol. Inside the house, Ethan exhaled for the first time in minutes. He whistled, short and low. Ranger returned immediately, bounding up the porch steps, snow clinging to his legs. Ethan rubbed the dog's flank, grateful for the creature's unwavering loyalty. The officers hauled Mark toward the cruiser. His protests faded under the storm's howl. On the porch, Ranger stood tall, chest rising and falling, eyes fixed on the basement door where Lily and Jacob would soon reappear. Truth before the court and the fracture in the soldier's heart. Snow settled silently along the courthouse steps, as though winter itself wished to listen. The family courtroom in Duluth was smaller than Ethan expected. Warm wood panels, soft yellow lighting, and a faint scent of old paper and polished floors. But despite the quiet setting, tension wound through his chest like barbed wire. Ethan Walker sat on a long wooden bench near the back, his broad shoulders rigid beneath a clean navy flannel shirt. His limp was more noticeable today. The cold always awakened the pain lodged in his left knee, a lingering reminder of a mission in Afghanistan that had ended with a helicopter crash and the loss of a teammate. At his feet lay Ranger. The German Shepherd looked calm, settled with his front legs stretched forward, his fur brushed smooth for the hearing, but his eyes were alert, watching Lily and Jacob like they were the only 2 souls in the room. The dog's harness, freshly wiped, but still scuffed from the night before, bore the familiar patch, "Service dog, do not pet." His presence grounded the children more than any adult could. Lily sat beside Jacob at the witness table, her small frame swallowed in a donated navy blue sweater. Her hair, brushed neatly by a social worker earlier, fell over her shoulders in soft brown waves. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. Jacob, pale and recovering, leaned into her side. His round face still held shadows of fear, though his breathing had steadied since the night of the attack. Across the room stood Dr. Melissa Hart, a pediatric specialist in her 40s with a calm, steady presence. She was tall, with light brown hair pinned into a neat twist, and wore glasses that gave her a stern but compassionate air. Her voice was soft yet unwavering as she addressed Judge Whitaker. "Your Honor, the injuries on both children reflect long-term physical abuse and neglect," she said, flipping open a folder. "These bruises are in various stages of healing. Some date weeks back. Jacob's chest congestion and low body weight indicate prolonged malnourishment." Judge Whitaker, a man in his early 60s with a square jaw, silver hair, and a reputation for fairness, listened intently. He leaned forward, hands clasped before him. His gray suit was impeccably pressed, and his expression held a solemn gravity befitting a man who had witnessed far too many tragedies from behind the bench. Dr. Hart continued, "If Mr. Walker had not intervened in time, I believe Jacob would have suffered acute respiratory failure that night." A hush fell across the room. Near the judge stood Karen Doyle, the social worker who had visited Ethan's cabin. Today she wore a charcoal cardigan over a burgundy blouse. Though her voice wavered slightly, she presented a thick stack of records. Statements from neighbors who had reported hearing shouting from Mark Harris's apartment, concerns from teachers about Lily arriving with bruises, even a call made by a passerby who once saw the children locked outside on a frigid afternoon. "Nothing was ever proven," Karen explained softly, "but there were warning signs." Judge Whitaker nodded gravely. "And now?" "Now," Karen said, glancing at Lily before steadying herself. "The children are finally in a safe environment." It was time for Lily to speak. Her legs shook as she stood. She looked small in the vast courtroom space, like a winter bird perched on a branch too thin. She touched Ranger's head with shaking fingers before stepping toward the microphone. Ranger's ears twitched, following her every move. Ethan held his breath. A court clerk, a thin woman with short blonde hair named Sandra Keene, leaned forward to adjust the microphone for Lily's height. Sandra's demeanor was gentle but professional, her soft blue eyes offering Lily silent reassurance. Lily swallowed. "When we lived with Uncle Mark," she began, voice trembling, he would hit me when I didn't move fast enough, or when Jacob cried too loud." Her eyes glistened. "He locked us on the balcony when he was angry. Even when it snowed. He said if I didn't do exactly what he wanted, he'd send Jacob away. Somewhere I couldn't find him." A quiet gasp rippled through the room. Even Sarah Delgado, the officer who had helped arrest Mark the night before, shifted uneasily in her seat at the side of the courtroom. Officer Sarah wore her uniform neatly today, her auburn hair pinned behind her ears, her expression sharp with restrained anger at the cruelty described. Lily's voice faltered, but then she glanced down. Ranger had risen, padding across the floor until he sat directly beside her at the podium, his warm weight pressed against her leg. Lily drew a breath. "He tried to hurt Jacob that night, so I ran. And Mr. Walker, he found us in the snow. He didn't yell. He didn't grab us. He just helped." Her voice broke, not from fear now, but from something raw, an emerging trust. Ethan looked away, jaw clenched, his eyes stinging with memories he couldn't outrun, his teammate dying in his arms. The scream of metal as their helicopter spiraled. The guilt that had lived inside him like scar tissue. He had failed to save someone once. He couldn't fail again. The judge reviewed the security footage from Ethan's home. Clear evidence of the attack, the threats, the gasoline. Mark Harris sat restrained at the far end of the courtroom, disheveled and glaring, his blonde hair matted, his jaw swollen from his arrest. His eyes darted around the room, searching for sympathy he knew he wouldn't find. When all statements were heard, Judge Whitaker folded his hands, gaze firm. "Mark Harris," he said, voice like a winter bell, "you are hereby stripped of all guardianship rights." A muffled sob of relief escaped Lily. Jacob leaned into Ethan, who instinctively rested a large, steady hand on the boy's back. The judge continued, "Lily Parker and Jacob Parker will enter the care of the state. However, Due to their established bond with Mr. Ethan Walker and their demonstrated sense of safety in his presence, the court recommends he be considered as their temporary guardian pending full evaluation. Ethan felt a hollow thud in his chest. A line had been drawn, one he hadn't realized he would reach. Lily turned toward him, hope shining through fear. Jacob clung to Ranger's fur. Ethan looked at them, two trembling children who had chosen him without asking for anything in return. Judge Whitaker adjusted his glasses and asked the question that hung between them like a held breath. "Mr. Walker, do you agree to become the children's temporary guardian?" Ethan's silence stretched. Ranger lifted his head. Lily gripped her sweater tightly, bracing herself. A new family in the long winter. Thin sunlight glimmered across the half-frozen lake, its surface shifting between ice and water like a promise slowly learning how to breathe again. 3 months had passed since the hearing. Winter still clung to Duluth, pressing its weight across rooftops and forests, but the days had grown brighter, the storms less fierce. Inside Ethan Walker's cabin, warmth had begun to stretch into the corners where silence once lived. Ethan stood at the kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, guiding Lily through the slow, rhythmic motion of folding flour into dough. At 10, she had grown sturdier, her cheeks a little rounder, her eyes brighter. The bruises had faded, replaced now by cautious confidence. Her brown hair was tied into a ponytail, loose strands framing her face as she worked. She stole quick, eager glances at Ethan, as though waiting for his approval. "You're doing good," Ethan said, voice quiet but sincere. She smiled, small but genuine. Jacob sat at the wooden table nearby, tracing tiny roads on a laminated map of Minnesota. The boy's health had improved. His cough now appeared only in occasional wisps. His blonde hair, once matted, had been trimmed neatly by a friendly barber, a short, soft cut that made his blue eyes seem larger. His fingers tapped rhythmically as he followed the map lines, whispering town names he was still learning to pronounce. Ranger lay stretched across the rug, head resting on his paws. The 5-year-old German Shepherd had grown even more protective these months, shadowing the children with quiet devotion. His dark fur gleamed in the morning light, and every so often his ears perked when Jacob giggled, or Lily scraped a spoon across the metal bowl. Ranger looked content, but the alertness behind his amber eyes never left. Life slowly began to settle into a pattern. In the afternoons, Ethan bundled the children in thick coats before heading to the snow-covered park. Lily always raced Ranger to the nearest tree. Ranger usually won, but Lily had gotten faster. Jacob stayed close to Ethan, watching everything with a gentle curiosity. They built small forts of snow, tossed soft snowballs, and fed dried apples to the winter birds perched in the pines. Sometimes in the distance they would see Mrs. Clara Finch, an elderly widow with silver hair coiled into a bun and a bright red scarf wrapped high around her neck. She lived 2 cabins down and often waved from her porch. Clara had a warm, tinkling laugh and cheeks that blushed easily from the cold. She brought homemade blueberry muffins when she could, and had taken to calling Lily and Jacob my little winter blossoms. For the children, who had once been invisible, her gentle affection felt like a blessing. But nights were where healing settled in deepest. One evening, snow drifted lazily outside while Ethan sat with Lily beside the fireplace. The flames reflected in the girl's eyes as she studied a memorial photo Ethan held, 4 men in uniform standing shoulder to shoulder, sand whipping around their boots. "That's Sergeant Hayes," Ethan said softly, tapping the picture. "Best medic I ever met. And Corporal Reyes, he could fix anything with duct tape and stubbornness." His voice dimmed. "And this was Sam." Lily looked up. "Your friend?" "My brother in every way that mattered." Ethan's jaw tightened briefly, then eased. "He didn't make it home." Lily leaned her shoulder against him, small and steady. "I'm sorry." Ethan nodded. For once the memory didn't tear him open. It stung, yes, but there was warmth around it now, something solid, something shared. Jacob soon joined them with mugs of warm cocoa, his mittens dangling from his sleeves. Ranger hopped up beside them, curling his body protectively around the children. The soft crackle of fire filled the room, wrapping around them like a second blanket. Later that week, Ethan drove the children to the Veterans Memorial downtown. The sky was pale gray, and flags snapped in the wind. Lily and Jacob stood quietly beside him as he ran his fingers across Sam's engraved name. Ethan spoke of the missions they'd shared, The nights they'd spent under Foresters, the promise they'd made to look after each other's families if anything happened. Lily slipped her hand into his without asking. "We'll look after each other too," she said. Jacob nodded fiercely. "Yeah, like your team did." Ethan swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the simple truth in their words. Home felt different after that. On a quiet Sunday evening, with snowflakes drifting like feathers, Lily shyly placed a drawing on the kitchen table. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. Ethan unfolded the paper. The drawing showed a tall man in a navy coat, a German shepherd with a black harness, and two children standing between them. Above their heads, in uneven, heartfelt handwriting, were the words, "Our family." For a long moment, Ethan didn't speak. The fire light flickered across his face, revealing a softness that rarely surfaced. His heart, scarred, weathered, deeply human, felt something shift, not break, not shatter, but open. He gently rested the drawing on the mantel, as though placing something sacred in a place of honor. Later that night, the cabin fell into a peaceful quiet. Lily and Jacob lay curled against Ranger in the living room, using his warm body as their pillow. Their breaths were slow and steady. Ranger didn't move except to occasionally flick his ear, keeping watch even in rest. Ethan sat in a nearby armchair, wrapped in the hush of crackling firewood. He watched the three of them, the children he had found in the snow, the dog who never left his side, the home rebuilt around them, and felt a small, genuine smile form on his lips. Outside, winter stretched long and cold across Duluth, but inside, the cabin, the warmth was steady and growing, enough to carry them through whatever storms remained. Some folks say miracles come with trumpets and bright light, but most of the time they slip into our lives quietly, the way snow settles on a window ledge. A man who had forgotten how to hope met two children who had forgotten how to trust, and on that winter road, something greater than fear stepped in. Maybe it was chance, maybe it was courage, or maybe it was the kind of mercy only God can lay in a person's path. If this story reached you in any way, I'd be grateful to hear your thoughts. Tell us where you were watching from. Share this story with someone who might need a reminder that kindness still matters. And if you'd like to walk with us through more moments of grace and grit, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. May God watch over you and the ones you carry in your heart, today and every day.